Okay, I am back. And this is my Global Predictions 2019. I'm going to be looking into quite a few countries, brief kind of quick fire predictions for each of them. I'm going to be doing China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Australia, South Africa, EU, UK, and America, and also throwing in a prediction for Donald Trump and for Bitcoin as well. So if you've watched my predictions before, you know that my style is usually to look at the solar arcs of transit affecting the charts of the country, and then look back into history and see if there are any synergies from which I can project forward. And then, of course, I use the information I have at hand and what seems to be going on politically to add to the mix, plus a little bit of comment. As you know, we get plenty of comment from me as well. If you haven't watched, I've just done one on Jupiter in Sagittarius and what I think that could possibly mean. Because as I mentioned at the start of my other vlog, this is quite a unique year, because as we go into it, we have Jupiter at home in its sign, Sagittarius. Saturn is in Capricorn. Mars right now has just entered Aries. It's on the Aries point as we enter New Year, which is powerful because Mars is the planet of energy, of action, of enterprise. Going to bring a lot of energy into this year. Plus, we also have Neptune still in Pisces. 4 planets, all in their home sign as we go into the new year. I mean, that's got to be big. As I said, the chances of that happening are really very, very, very small. It's a particularly rare thing to happen at New Year. So that's big. Right. If you haven't caught up, if this is the first time you've seen me, thank you so much for watching. Thank you very, very much to all my subscribers and to the incredibly positive comments that I always get on my channel. Thanks, guys. It's great. It's wonderful to have your support, and I'm thrilled with. I mean, I may not be in the league of the big YouTubers, but for me, I'm totally happy, and I think we've got a great community going here, and we share some wonderful chats about politics and whatever. And yes, I will be doing some more of the personal stuff, but I find, especially because it's New Year, I mean, it's political stuff. It doesn't get bigger, does it? Because so much is happening right now. I think people are probably more interested to know what's going to happen politically than to happen to them personally, because that's what I get most of my questions about. Please watch my global predictions that I did the beginning of 2018. That was for 2018, 2019, and 2020, because those focus a lot at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's happening at the beginning of 2020, all the themes around that, and the themes around Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which I've also talked about in my Agenda 21 chart. Also, my chart on communism gives a lot of context. And although I'm going to chat about China now, if you are interested a bit more in China, please do watch the communism blog and the Agenda 21 blog, where I've talked a little bit more. Okay, I think we're ready to go, aren't we? So, China. Okay, quite a few interesting things going on in the charts of China. So, China is a Libra country. They have Aquarius rising. They have the moon rising in Aquarius. And they have Jupiter in the 12th house. Now, I first noticed that Jupiter was going to be affected by the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, by the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn was going to affect Jupiter, which is in Capricorn, and it's going to be affecting it at the end of this year. So I looked to see what had happened in the past. So when Pluto had by transit squared that position, and Saturn had affected by solar arc, was exactly the time of Tiananmen Square. So that said to me, that Saturn-Pluto effect hitting off on Jupiter in the 12th says to me that there's some sort of sleeping giant of discontent in China just waiting to wake up. So look out this year for something like Tiananmen Square. Maybe not one flashpoint, maybe lots of smaller flashpoints all around the country that give the feeling of the people in China being restless. And I think, well, look, if you're one of the 90 million Chinese that are in the Chinese Communist Party, you're probably doing fantastically and your life is great. But for the rest of the people, you know, life isn't that great. They are oppressed, particularly in the rural areas. And they have the social score thing. It's an incredibly authoritarian government. And what I see with Jupiter in the 12th is that on the underground, you know, just bubbling under the surface, people have this burning desire for more freedom. They've reached a point of saying that this is enough. It's got to the point where there has to be a pushback against it because the control is becoming more and more oppressive. We've got to push back, and that's what I see. Now, I also see within China this need for some kind of spirituality or religion more than spirituality. Not so much because people want to become religious, but they need faith. They need something to fill a void that isn't available. And I often think throughout the time, communism has always clamped down on religion. They see it as a threat. Why do they see it as a threat? Because people can kind of coalesce around a religion. They can become inspired about it. It's a reason for people to come together. It's a bonding thing. And also people going to churches or their mosques, it's a place of assembly, because often in China, you don't have freedom of assembly. It's hard even within a religious context to have it. So with more people, if they do embrace religion, it's a way to come together to unite against something. And it also gives people a sense of greater purpose in life, which sometimes allows you to take on the Goliath as David, So I do see a groundswell of a movement. There's movement in China. The people are not happy with the government. And there's going to be a bubbling up. So look out for anything that could represent a Tiananmen or similar things. Not quite yellow vests. I don't think they're ready to go there with yellow vests yet, but you never know. So Saturn is on the midheaven. Now, two things with this. The progressed moon is also opposite Neptune. What I'm getting from this, would be a opposition between the second house and the eighth house. I think China is having a lot of problems with their pensions. They've got an aging population and they're having a problem. It's top heavy. And now it's becoming a big problem. Also personal debt there. So while it's not so much public debt, it's personal debt. It's so many people in China who've borrowed, who've overextended themselves. That's becoming a weight and a problem. I do see what Donald Trump has done with disrupting this whole Chinese kind of the stronghold they had on world trade. Beginning to, yes, I do think China will, I'd say, turn Christian in 2019. Probably not in 2019, but that is the direction, Jackie. Yeah. Happy New Year to you. Yeah, you got it. They are moving towards it. The Chinese people need something. They need to embrace something. And it's going to be a kind of religion, like I say, just to give them that confidence to take on something that they've been held up. Do you know communism seems to have a 70-year life cycle? China turns 70 this year. And I think it's the end of communism then. Communism seems to hit 70 and then it goes, implodes. Yeah, so I think we could see that. And I think it wouldn't have happened without Trump putting the pressure on them because they've had the rub of the green. It's all just been too easy. But I think because of the recession coming in Europe and because I think Americans will be it's not going to be all hunky-dory there. Plus, things that Trump's doing with trade. It's all going to affect China. So they've got their personal debt. They've got their pension problems. I also think there's a problem in China with productivity to do with the health of the nation. Now, Neptune rules the sixth house of health, moon on the cusp of the first house, and also representing the public and representing health. They're coming to oppose each other. And Saturn, which is the sign of the planet of infectious diseases, is on the midheaven. So I wonder if there could be in China some sort of outbreak like SARS or bird flu, something that's really going to affect the country, affect their trade, affect their travel, affect their tourism, something like an outbreak of a disease. But I think in general, public health in China is very poor. Look at the pollution. I think they might be experiencing low productivity and a high death rate among younger people. And I'm not talking about the oldies now, because of course the pensioners are there. But I do think possibly lower productivity and problems because of public health. Those are kind of the themes I see affecting China. Just wanted to touch on this with the Huawei, don't say the mobile phone now. Huawei's are so cheap because they are subsidized by the Chinese Communist government. So they're the ultimate Trojan horse. People in Europe are buying them because they're cheap. They're very flexible because they can be reprogrammed remotely. But that does allow the Chinese government to hack in to every bit of your information. We talked in Agenda 21 about how the chips in Apple, which are made in China, it's been discovered there's a little chip in there the size of a grain of rice that can kind of hack your data. So it's a way the Chinese are having this pervasive control of not only their own population, but of us as well. And thank goodness Donald Trump and now Gavin Williamson, our defense secretary, have logged on that you can't have a secure country if you allow China to install all your 5G. And right now, China have the two leading 5G companies, because 5G is the thing of which all your driverless cars, all your driverless trucks, all your driverless trains, along with the Internet of Things, everything we do on the Internet, will be controlled. And if China control that, they can literally switch off everything in your whole country. They've got absolute power. I know you get a lot of people, for example, the conspiracy community or the alternate community, which are full of, America's bad, America does this, America invades countries, and they seem to heap praise on China, saying, well, China are just minding their own business. But you've got to remember, you don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So China have just been sitting back quietly while America have been having these misadventures in Libya and Syria and Iraq, and they've been quietly taking control of 98% of the rare earth minerals and all the deep sea ports, and they've been pushing themselves into extremely powerful strategic position globally. And it's time we woke up to that and realized, people tend to take this attitude now of, oh, we travel the world, we have free trade, it's all nice, we all love each other, we all trade, we all getting on. But the world is an extremely competitive place, and there are big power blocks who have their interests, and they're going to push their interests. And if we don't go and bat for our side and push our interests, then we are going to be swamped. And if China want to push for their way to dominate the world, well, good for them. If other groups want to push for their way, good for them. But I'm not batting for their team, so it doesn't help me. I've got to wake up and bat for my own team and fight back against it. And I think thanks to some people who are now waking up in the West, that's going to be happening. Right. Yeah, I see mass repossessions in China, people having their homes repossessed and all that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it goes with property rights in China, because communists generally aren't too happy with property rights. I'm not sure if people own their property outright there, but I do see a certain amount of repossessions taking place. Okay, yeah. I think that's all we need to do for China. All right, let's look at Iran. Two things with Iran. There's activation of the 10th house with Uranus and also the 5th house. So I see some change in control, but it's not radical. And I'm not one of these people who think there's going to be war with Iran. I'm not following that route. I don't see anything to do with war in Iran. I see sanctions biting, and I see at the top the conservatives getting more and more conservative, but the youth getting more and more liberal. And I see something of a cultural revolution going on in Iran. So it's not so much violence. I think the youth are coming together via art, music, and culture and expressing themselves via that. And they are building up a kind of head of steam towards reform. I think things look quite positive for Iran. Now, Iran is having the sanctions bite, but I tried to make the point, which I don't think everyone got, that sometimes sanctions strengthen a country because they become more self-sufficient. So I drew the comparison with Brexit, is we can use the problems Brexit creates to create more self-sufficiency, which is exactly what Iran is doing. America have pumped up sanctions, but I see all this activity in the 4th house of Iran, where they are just becoming more powerful, more self-sufficient, more self-reliant. They're also becoming a lot more resourceful. I definitely see there big infrastructure projects. I don't know if they're building a pipeline, something like that, or I would guess they've upped their nuclear program. So that is something I think Iran are definitely doing. But I think there is a certain amount of prosperity being generated there, and there's definitely a grassroots push towards change. We'll see a little bit of that. Remember the beginning of last year, there was some hints of public discontent and some protests in Iran, but I think something better is coming there. And yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, I don't think that America would take out Iran, because there's a counterbalance going on. You've got Israel and Saudi Arabia are getting on kind of well because they've got this mutual enemy in Iran. If you knock out Iran, then Israel's kind of on its own. America won't do that, will they? But I do think changing in Saudi Arabia. I see that the kind of end of Saudi as we've known it. I think that country is coming to, well, kind of not the end, as it were, in a country, but they're coming to the end of their powerful phase. So when we think about Saudi Arabia, there's always been the thing of the petrodollar. And I see in America's chart, there's a lot going on with their currency. It's almost like they're trying to make the dollar so it would survive, even should they not have the kind of benefit of the petrodollar anymore. And they're trying to move away from that. They're also bringing up interest rates to support the dollar. So they're looking now beyond life with Saudi Arabia as an ally. And I think America looking more towards Turkey. And I don't think it's all about the Khashoggi affair. I think the Khashoggi affair might have been a little, what would you say, collateral damage from what's going on. If you remember, there was a point last year when all the princes in Saudi, there were about 117 princes, and they were locked up in the Ritz-Carlton, imprisoned there, actually. They were literally strung up by the ankles and shaken until the gold coins fell out their pockets. So there was a shakedown, and they were forced to pay back a lot of money in taxes, and they've started taxation for the first time in Saudi Arabia. So I think there's been a mismanagement of their funds. They're running dry of finances. They don't have the power they once had. Also, America and Russia now are the key oil producers, also the key gas producers. And America is produced more crude oil than ever this year. Saudi Arabia is now number 3. And while number 3 is still very high on the pecking list, proportionately, when you add in all the other countries now, they're far further down the scale in terms of the oil production. They're not the power they once were. So I think that America maybe, I do feel that there is maybe some influence of the deep state in Iran in terms of pushing the whole cultural revolution thing. And they're only doing that because they know that Saudi Arabia, their star's waning as well. So those two will sort of be less powerful, less at loggerheads, and America will be moving their attention over to Turkey. Yes, okay, so that's all about. Seem to think there was something else I wanted to say about Saudi, but it's gone out of my mind at the moment, so it couldn't have been that important. Right, let's just talk about South Africa. South Africa's got elections coming this year. There's loads of action in the 11th house. South Africa have Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in Aquarius in the 11th house. And as you know, there's a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coming up next year in Aquarius, plus Uranus will be triggering those two. So I see a great change in terms of their legislature. So because Neptune is also affecting the moon in the 10th, I think it's the time the ANC are losing their power. They won't have the grip, because South Africa's basically always been a one-party state since the 60s, because we had the National Party and they were the dominant force. The other parties just couldn't really even get a look in, and since the National Party, the ANC took over and they've been the dominant force. No one else can get a look in. I think that's about to change. Whether they actually toppled in 2019, probably not, but I do think it's going to change. I see a lot of social unrest in South Africa in terms of student protests and more breakdown of law and order. I think obviously corruption's an ongoing theme there, but I think Ramaphosa is going to have a rocky ride with perhaps some insider trading, dealing, things like that. I think South Africa might do fairly okay economically next year, because they have a counter-cyclical economy. As things get more uncertain with the trade war between America and China, a recession in Germany and France, and maybe America's growth coming down, people are going to look to gold. It'll help South Africa. So I do see some positives for them. There's quite a lot of positives in the South African chart. I know a lot of people have freaked out about the land possession thing, but I think there'll be an enormous amount of legal challenges surrounding that might stall it. So I don't think it's going to end up being the big civil war causing thing that a lot of people are thinking it will be. So it's quite a few things to watch out for South Africa. Nothing, okay, it's not that dramatic, but it's definitely a shift in the right direction. We can't bring corruption under control in a one-party state where the one party is so dominant they're going to get in no matter what. So if they start shifting on that, things will be a lot better. Okay, I mentioned on my other vlog that I thought that probably not this year, but at some stage Assad is going to land up in the Hague for war crimes. I think a deal has been done under the table, and I think that's probably what's going to happen to him at some point. Right, okay. Let's look. Okay, lots going on with the EU. Now, I had another look at the EU chart. It really is a terrible chart. I thought at one stage that the person who decided on the time of the EU, in 1991 and the Maastricht Treaty knew what they were doing, but no. In terms of electional astrology, it's a horrible chart, because you've got the moon, the most elevated planet, and in an angular house being confronted by the big baddies of Mars and Saturn. It's opposite Mars, Pluto, it's square Saturn, all in angular houses. This is not good for the survival of the EU. So I'll say right now that I think the EU, especially being born just after the full moon, going into the waning moon period with their the moon so afflicted, it's not an institution that can survive. Plus their sun receives virtually no supportive placements, and Venus is only really helping out the Jupiter, the Uranus, Neptune conjunction in the 6th. So there's not really a lot good going on about that chart. So the first thing I've got to say is Uranus is affecting their 10th house, which is ruled by Taurus. We know Uranus is going into Taurus. I think when they have the European elections in 2019, we're going to see a huge shift. Lots of votes for the Greens, lots of votes for the kind of more right-wing parties, from Marine Le Pen's party, the coalition that UKIP was with, Swedish Democrats, and Viktor Orban's group. It's almost like the centre-left is going to be wiped out. This is going to be a massive wake-up call for the EU. And I see a huge PR effort. They're going to start making all the right noises, talking about reform, blah, blah, blah. They don't mean it. Underneath it all, they are doubling down. And the first thing they're going to do is start VAT harmonization and tax harmonization next year. And so they're going to double down. They're not going to abandon this project. And if the elections don't go their way, they're just going to find a way through it. So when Mercury triggered this whole square between Mars-Pluto, opposite the Moon, square Saturn, first time it was triggered was the Kosovo War. So a war right on the doorstep of Europe, right? Next time it was triggered was during the time of both the Lisbon Treaty and the financial crisis. So the Lisbon Treaty was a time when people showed their discontent, because all over Europe they were voting against it. And of course, they were being made to vote again until they gave the right answer, the EU light. But it was also a time when they pushed one big step forward to unification. So what do I see from this? I see that they want to expand. And they're going to make overtures to Ukraine, which is, of course, going to make Russia very angry. I think it's going to aggravate the situation in Ukraine and cause rising tensions there, and perhaps maybe even reignite the civil war in Ukraine. So that's one of the things. Definitely recession, definitely a drop in output in terms of manufacturing. This could be due to much weaker demand, due to Brexit, due to what Trump's doing with tariffs and the way he's obviously going to promote American cars, America first. So a downgrade in their production, which is not good. I see also problems with the weather in terms of floods, a lot of flooding in Hungary and also in Czechoslovakia, maybe some flooding in the UK, some heat waves, and that not that that's really going to affect the EU as it comes to leadership, right? So a lot of tokenism in terms of reform, and definitely some more financial trouble. But I still think they're going to keep it. It will be not good, but they're still going to keep kicking that one down the road. As I talked about in Jupiter and Sagittarius, I see a very strong leader beginning to emerge, probably from Germany or France. Someone who seems to be making the right sort of noises in terms of uniting people and having a slight nationalistic flavor, although this person's going to be EU through and through and is going to be looking to push the project further. This person probably can't be trusted, and I'd say this person is probably going to be quite hawkish in terms of wanting to take on Russia. Okay, so as I say, yes, politics going towards the extreme. Some trouble in Spain in terms of the Catalan independence and the Spanish. I think the Spanish, maybe even more than the Italians this year, are going to be the firebrands who's going to start pushing the envelope in terms of this EU project. Because right now, really, everywhere over Europe has got a strong, what would I call it, a Brexiteer faction. Spain and Portugal were the sort of the last ones that didn't, but now they're going to be coming on board fully. The immigration thing is obviously, you've been watching the news in the UK and people coming across the channel. I think it'll be ramped up. It's going to be big news again, this thing. There's no Fortress Europe. I think there are going to be more and more and more people coming. But of course, the more people come, the more it galvanizes opinion in terms of, people wanting to be, xenophobic, I suppose they would call it, wouldn't they? Okay, now the final thing I'd like to say, it came about when I was looking at the France chart. So if any of you watched my broadcast on Macron and the chart of France, you know that I was kind of puzzled, even when I was chatting to you, about what on earth this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Scorpio in the 7th house was all about. And I was pondering it, because I know this conjunction's being triggered in France so much in 2019. And I look back over the French chart, and there was never everything listed as particularly important happening in France at the time. So I thought to myself, okay, you've got Neptune, that kind of means poison. And I thought, what does poison mean in terms of a country, And then I thought, well, Scorpio is really explosive. Jupiter's big. This whole thing is big. And all of a sudden, I thought, I'm going to go and look back, because I knew 1986 this was triggered, and then suddenly I thought Chernobyl was 1986. I thought this is some sort of nuclear problem. So I checked back, and every time that Neptune-Jupiter conjunction in Saturn was triggered in France, there was a nuclear accident in France, quite a major one with many millions of franc or euros worth of damage happening. And France was particularly badly affected by Chernobyl. Even many years later, apparently there were class actions and lawsuits by French people who felt that they weren't adequately warned about eating fresh produce or drinking the water from the Alps, and who developed thyroid cancer. And that dragged on many, many years. So I'm thinking there's going to be some sort of nuclear accident in Europe, probably in France. Now, I wouldn't rule out it being at one of the French-built power stations in the south of the UK, because the weather patterns in the UK would blow it right back into France, wouldn't they? I'm going to watch out for that. I think it's something that definitely could happen. Now, bear in mind that the optimal age for a nuclear power plant at which it should be decommissioned is 25 years. The average age of nuclear power plants all over the world is 36 years. So most of them are over their sell-by date. Now, if you've watched President Trump talk about cheap Chinese steel, now they put sand in it and it's not very good steel. These French nuclear reactors are made with cheap Chinese steel. They're an accident waiting to happen, and I think this could be the year. But I mean, that's kind of worrying for all of us, and I'm not quite sure how we even got against it. But that's one of the things I see happening as well. Just to go back to Saudi Arabia, I think what else is hitting them hard is it's more expensive for them to export oil, because they have to pay £6 per cubic foot of oil to transport it on tanker. Whereas when Russia used their pipelines like Nordgren and Southgren that have now been finished, it only costs them £2, $2, should I say, per cubic foot to transport the oil. It's much more cost effective. So Saudi Arabia being edged out. And I think, like with all allies, America get to the point like they did with Mubarak, with Gaddafi, with Saddam Hussein, where they have enough of their allies and then they get kicked into the long grass. I think they've had enough with Saudi Arabia. It's the end of their tenure as such a valuable ally, and they're on their way down. So keep watching for more of that. Okay, UK. I'm only going to talk briefly about the UK because I've already given you quite a lot on Brexit. So I've got with the UK, I've got Brexit, as you know. I think it's going to be a hard Brexit. And right at the end of it, we maybe will sneak out just before or just after with some sort of arrangement or transition arrangement. But I think that what the thing is, the worst thing when you've got this economic problems is uncertainty. And they've created this massive amount of fear and uncertainty, and that's done more harm to business than I think Brexit themselves. So once we so-called go over the cliff edge and people find that there is light the other side, that things haven't ended, I think that could actually be the big unifying force that brings us all together, is once it's actually happened. We do go out sort of over the cliff edge, find there is life the other side, find that suddenly opportunities do arise. Yes, lots of people will cry because they were heavily invested in the EU, but there are loads of entrepreneurs and people who are going to see opportunities and create opportunities and move forward. So we could actually see the economy improving a little bit due to the stability, the stock market improving. So that should be quite good. As far as the UK, we've already talked about King Charles and changes in the royal family, which I think is coming. There's not too much else for the UK. Let's see. And changes in fishing and agriculture, I think there'll be a positive effect for them. And yeah, I did see possibly a little scandal to do with Meghan in terms of tweeting things she's saying, because, you know, it's very difficult. You can't get to 37 years old where you've always been able to go on social media, speak your mind, say what you want, and suddenly go into an arrangement where you can't have any public opinions at all. And I think she might get caught out saying a few things, being political, and that might upset people. So yes, okay, thanks. I'm going to read your comments now. And as you know, I've still got to do what I was going to have for America and Donald Trump. So I hope you've enjoyed that, guys.